Following the lecture, please, 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 by all means, if you want to be on the screen, we'll make you a co-host or a panelist, and at that time you'll be able to be seen. If you prefer to have but then you are agreeing to be recorded because this lecture is being recorded, so we want people to know that if you do want to show your face. Otherwise, please feel free to leave those questions in the chat, and I'll be certain to ask those on your behalf of Dr. Boyes.
Thank you.
That's good. Okay, great. So it's 2:01. We're going to go ahead and get started. There are a dozen of us assembled already. So we definitely expect more, and we'll just catch them up as we come in. But a few little housekeeping items. First, I'm Rita Walters. Again, I'm the Vice President of Development and Alumni Relations, and we are absolutely thrilled to have you here celebrating our reunion this year. So thank you all for coming back. We know it's virtual, but we do hope to be in person someday soon. Julia, are you ready to show the welcome video at this time?
I hope so. And I put in, there are 2 email addresses in the chat in case anybody has any questions.
Right, great. Yeah. I have a little bit of a welcome video, and then it'll take about 1 minute or so.
Hey, what's up, Union alum? Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to Union.
Welcome to Reunion 2021.
We're so glad you could join us for this year's virtual reunion,
where we've come together to reunite with our community safely,
reflect on a year of global challenge,
and rejoice in our faith and our mission of service to the church, academy, and society.
Now, more than ever, our community is called to truly change the world
by bringing a religiously grounded, critical, and yet compassionate presence
to the major personal, social, political, and scientific realities of our time.
We hope the reunion programming planned for this week will leave you feeling enriched
and also reconnected to Union.
We celebrate your return, and we appreciate you for your bountiful support.
Through your prayers, through your giving, and through your ongoing devotion.
As my Danish family says, mange tak, which is simply thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. I can't wait to see you, and enjoy the week.
Know that you are welcomed. And so our entire community says welcome, welcome, welcome. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Mary Boyes. Dr. Mary C. Boyes is the Skinner and McAlpin Professor of Practical Theology and an adjunct faculty member of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. Prior to her present appointment in 1994, she served for 17 years on the faculty of Boston College. A Seattle native, she has been a vowed member of the Sisters of the Holy Name since 1968. Boyes received her master's and doctoral degrees from Columbia University in 1978, so a fellow alum in a moment, and a joint program with Union Theological Seminary. She has done advanced study at the Ecumenical Institute for Theological Research in Jerusalem, Israel, and is a recipient of honorary doctorates from Hebrew College Jewish Institute of Religion, 2004. The Catholic Theological Union, 2007, the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, 2008, and Gratz College, 2012. She has been a Lilly Research Fellow and was a Henry Lutz III Fellow in Theology for 2005. She was the recipient of the Anne O'Hara Graff Award from the Catholic Theological Society of America. Professor Boyes is the author of 6 books: Biblical Interpretation and Religious Education, 1980, Educating in Faith, Maps and Vision, 1989, Jewish Christian Dialogue, One Woman's Experience, 1997, Has God Only One Blessing? Judaism as a Source of Christian Self-Understanding, 2000. Christians and Jews in Dialogue, Learning in the Presence of the Other, 2006. Co-authored with Sarah S. Lee, and Redeeming Our Sacred Story, The Death of Jesus and Relations Between Jews and Christians, 2013. Among her edited books are Seeing Judaism Anew, A Sacred Obligation of Christians, 2005, and the co-edited volume, Christ Jesus and the Jewish People Today, 2011. I would like to say we've done some reading, preparing for this on Dr. Boyes and her topic of today. And I am the first to say that you are absolutely in for a treat. So thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, I present to some and introduce to others, Dr. Mary Boyes.
Thank you, Rita. And thanks to all of you for coming, for participating in this unusual way of having a reunion, not a satisfactory way, but it is an important way of being together in a mode that at least allows us to talk with one another, and very often anyway to see one's faces. So I realized that this is not a feel-good topic. And it's one that I'm giving in the backdrop of today's closing arguments at the Derek Chauvin trial.
Yes.
The massive outbreak of gun violence in our country, in which some nearly 90 people have died in a little over a month. The vicious anti-Asian attacks, a very sobering time, and yet a time amidst this pandemic in which it's so vital for us as church people, as religious people, to keep hope alive. So, and I would say that this is not a talk that I've ever given before. It is one that I did put together for this reunion because it brings together two of my interests. And I've spent a lot of my career on working on relations between Jews and Christians theologically, and also in the realm of interreligious dialogue. And trying very much as a white woman to become increasingly clear about what my white identity has privileged me and what my responsibilities and obligations are to help to foster racial justice. It's a very serious task. So what I'd like to do today is to lay out a few clarifications and then to show the connections between racism and anti-Semitism. And then in the final and the larger part of this presentation, to engage in a conversation with you, not just Q&A. I mean, I'm certainly happy to take questions, but I'm really interested in your perspectives. So we're the three of us who are hosting this are at three different locations. Julia is hosting the PowerPoint, so I just will need to ask her then when we move to the slides. So if we could just move to the next slide. There are only really 11 slides, so and I won't have this on the whole time. So just by way of an overview, I want first just to clarify a few things by way of definitions. Definitions can always be argued and expanded and so on and so forth. I don't see that there's a need to spend a lot of time on that, but just for clarity. And then the larger part will be on some historical perspectives. I have to say that knowing this history does provide some context for the present. I also would add that it's not really consoling to know that a lot of the issues that are dividing us today are ones that have surfaced in the lifetime of our country, and of course, are global issues as well. And then finally, the last part is to engage in conversation with you about the role of our religious traditions, and particularly that of Christians. I can see from the names that some of you I know, others of you I don't know. So anyway, we'll have a little adventure. So if we could go then please to slide 3, thank you. So this definition of anti-Semitism is one by a sociologist, Helen Fine, is one that's probably used the most extensively. Now, anti-Semitism has been called the world's longest hatred, and I start with it because of its antiquity, but also because it comes first in the alphabet. So I'm not trying to privilege anything here. So it's a persistent, latent structure of hostile beliefs toward Jews as a collectivity. And it's manifested first in individuals as attitudes, secondly, in cultures as myth, ideology, and folklore, as well as imagery. Those of you who've done anything in art history know how Jews have been portrayed, particularly in the late Middle Ages. And then also hostile beliefs in actions, that is, in social and legal discrimination, in political mobilization against Jews, collective or state violence, which results in and or is designed to distance, displace, or destroy Jews as Jews. It's a complicated definition, but I think she gets at the way in which it manifests itself, not simply on the individual basis, but in a cultural, societal sense. And we'll see the same thing is true with racism, which is the next slide, please. There are many definitions of racism, and in a way, it's in part because so many different factors come to play. So it's also related to ethnicity, to national identity, to nationalism. So I've taken this from Isabel Wilkerson's fine book on caste, and she talks about racism. Now, make a distinction here. Race is not has no scientific foundation. We're 99 and 9/10% as human beings alike. So as she says in her book, race is color. I mean, as a fact. But the more important thing is not race, it's racism. That is any action or institution that mocks, harms, assumes or attaches inferiority or stereotype on the basis of a social construct of race. And she argues in her book, which is just a splendid read, that racism is so connected to casteism. That is, any structure or action that seeks to limit or hold back people, put someone in a defined ranking, keeping people in their place is at the essence of caste. And so racism and casteism are I think we could say almost indelibly connected with one another. Now, there's a third word that I want to bring up because it has to do with the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally in August of 2017. So the next slide deals with replacement theory. I must admit that when I first saw the videos of the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, I was so shocked just by the visuals, the tiki torches, the KKK-like, Nazi-like behavior of these mostly white men. And I didn't really understand then what they meant by "you will not replace us, Jews will not replace us," which was this malevolent chant that they shouted to anybody who would listen. So replacement theory is based, it comes out of white nationalism, and it's based on the belief that the so-called rising tide of color that the civil rights movement and immigration reform have brought about are dooming the white race. And the connection of Jews to this is that it's the Jews who allegedly control and manipulate this rising tide of color. This is a variation on one of the most virulent stereotypes and myths about Jews, and that is that they control the world. They control everything. Now, I was reading the Washington Post over the weekend, and there's a headline, the GOP's gradual descent into replacement theory. So what I saw with horror, heard with horror in the Charlottesville rally, now we see in the halls of our Congress to a certain extent, thanks largely to Fox and to Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham and others. So this notion that immigrants are coming to replace us good white citizens, and that they will control the vote. And this is how the Democrats are taking over. So these things are all connected: replacement theory, racism, and anti-Semitism. So let me then go to some historical perspectives. And so the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So there's a very interesting book by J. Cameron Carter on race and theology, race, a theological account. And he has a long and somewhat difficult chapter on Immanuel Kant's work. He's really, Kant is the first really to have a philosophy of race. It's hard to think of him as an enlightened thinker when you see how he accounts for the variant races in which he decides. He's not entirely consistent on how many races there are and whether exactly whites are a race. There were kind of, whites are sort of the great race. They contain all motivations and talents. But at least in 1775, he was saying, well, there are these four races: American Indian, Negro, Hindus, and whites. I'm choosing, for the purpose of time, not to go into the detail here, but what we see is that race as a category pretty much comes into use or into dominance with the dawn of modernity. And there are complex political reasons for all of that. I'm not going to take the time to go in that direction. But you can see that once you set up, you name different races, that there's a very clear caste that Kant has, and that is that whites are at the top. And of course, of all the whites, the Germanic peoples they're at the very top at the top. His own presuppositions are just so incredibly obvious in this. At the same time, you have the dawning of the eugenics movement, in which, measuring skulls and, this whole notion that we have to rid society of people whose genes are going to contaminate the gene pool. And the eugenics movement was deeply racist, and it was deeply anti-Semitic and very influential for the Nazi movement. So moving along to the next slide. I had, I'm looking for images, trying to make this talk come alive a little bit when, we can't interact in person. And I have to say, just as an aside, giving a lecture on Zoom is just so deadly because I'm talking to my computer and, it's crazy. But anyway, I do love this particular image, although I did think of maybe just putting out a photo of Marjorie Taylor Greene. But conspiracy theories are, well, here's how one person describes, and this is from Deborah Lipstadt. Conspiracy theories, she says, reduce complex issues to the simplest denominator, and then they infuse them with heated exaggerations, suspicions, and fantasies that have no connections, to fact. And this is something, the way in which conspiracy theories have taken a whole, they're not new. In fact, Lipstadt argues in her book on anti-Semitism that anti-Semitism is at heart a conspiracy theory. But this person, me, I certainly worry about the way in which we are becoming so fact-free and that we don't agree as human beings on basic facts. And we see this now in the desire to, I guess, I'm going to coin a term here, defactualize, make a conspiracy theory really out of the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. No, it wasn't Trump supporters, it was Antifa, it was Black Lives Matter, which you can see here. When you blame Black Lives Matter over against the visuals of these 99 and 9/10% white folks entering the Capitol, you know that we have really turned a corner on anything that resembles adherence to fact. However, there are some moments in US history that I think are important to know and that really enable us to see our times in perspective. So if we go to the next slide, please, Julia, even though that lovely guy is so attractive on the screen. So I did a talk a couple of years ago at a conference in Sweden on white nationalisms. And don't pretend that this is anything by way of expertise, but at any rate, I did some research about US history, and one of the persons who's very influential early in the 20th century is a New York man by the name of Madison Grant, who wrote a number of books, but one is on the passing of the Great Race, and you can imagine who the Great Race is. And there's just there were a couple of quotes that I pull out for the sake of this talk, because it illustrates both the racism and the anti-Semitism. So the man of the old stock is being crowded out of many country districts by those foreigners, just as he is today being literally driven off the streets of New York City by the swarms of Polish Jews. It is evident that in large sections of the country, the Native Americans, that is, the white Protestant Europeans, I mean, the irony of calling those of European descent Native Americans passes him by. But anyway, so the Native Americans will entirely disappear under this immigrant influx. Similarly, he says later in that same book, if the melting pot is allowed to boil without control, and we continue to follow our national motto and deliberately blind ourselves to all distinctions of race, creed, or color, the type of Native American of colonial descent will become as extinct as the Athenian of the age of Pericles. I was very tempted to put in a video clip of Tucker Carlson just a week or so ago, because Madison Grant lives in the Tucker Carlson world. In 1924, the Immigration Act severely limited immigration from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. We didn't want Jews and we didn't want Italians, didn't really want Irish either. And the whole point of that Immigration Act in 1924 was to keep America homogeneous. And it was really not until 1965 that is changed. So and there are, I think, people who would like so by virtue of this Immigration Act, we totally excluded Asians. Earlier, 1882, there had been the Chinese Exclusion Act, but there had been an arrangement that was called a gentleman's agreement with Japan, and Japanese were permitted to emigrate. But that Immigration Act of 1924 now forbade the Japanese to come. So when we look later on, in the 1940s to what happens at Pearl Harbor, I'm not justifying it. I'm only saying that the kind of anti-Asian attitudes that were part of that act in 1924 have come back to bite us in very serious ways. Now, the next slide. These are just two books that I think are really crucial for understanding the connection of anti-Semitism and racism, both by American authors. So James Whitman has done it's a relatively, well, they're both books are relatively short, showing how Hitler and his gang studied the Jim Crow laws as a way of foreshadowing what they would come in the Nuremberg laws. So it's a very sobering book to read, that, you know, it was the racism as structured by Jim Crow that helped Hitler to think of ways in which he could exclude Jews from Nazis, from society, from German society. The second book, Plantations and Death Camps, is actually one of my favorite books. It's written by a historian at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C., Beverly Mitchell. And what it's a study that brings together what happened to enslaved people and what happened in the death camps of Europe. And her thesis is that what was experienced by the enslaved and what was experienced by those in concentration camps was the brutality of dehumanization. At any rate, it's not a lengthy book. It's a very, very important book. And I urge all of you to read it, because I think there's material there that we can use in our own reflections in our time. I have my eye on the clock as well, so we're going to go to the next slide, please. So, conversation among us. Rita has suggested that certainly questions are welcome, but I also would like to say comments are welcome too, whether you want to do them through chat or just I don't know exactly what the technology is here that they will use to recognize you, and you can ask it in your own voice. But how do we respond to these twin evils in our time? What's the role of the churches? And I'm especially, of course, as a church person myself, I'm especially interested in this latter question. The churches I mean, we had, thankfully, the emergence of the Black church, and I highly recommend the new film on PBS on the Black church by Henry Louis Gates. But otherwise, the dominant church traditions of mostly white folks have a terrible, terrible record on race. And it is really the churches that marked Jews out, and that we cannot talk about the history of anti-Semitism without talking about the failure of Christianity to teach about Judaism in a respectful way. Instead, what we had, and it's been documented by the French Jewish historian Jules Isaac, as a teaching of contempt. So how do we develop a teaching of respect for the other? What kinds of strategies, what kinds of language, what kinds of rituals and symbols can we use in our time so that we respond to the dehumanization that continues? So I'm going to stop, and Rita, as moderator, may want to step in here and move things along. And we still have a good 15 minutes, and we also have the welcome film that we can still welcome you even at the end.
Right, thank you. Dr. Boyce, I was taking notes really quickly as you were speaking. This is such food for thought. And I thank you for introducing this lecture to this audience for the first time. We have about 21 people who are gathered here. Again, as Dr. Boyce has mentioned, this is meant to be a conversation. And if you would like to come on stage as it is and engage in that conversation, please just raise your hand. There's a hand, it says raise hand at the bottom of your screen. You can actually just raise that hand and come on, and we will reveal your image and voice, and we can start this dialogue. There is a statement so far that Anna has asked. Anna, do you want to just, I see that you are muted, but do you want to just ask that to recite that statement yourself?
Sure.
To get us started.
I wrote in there that the mainline churches need to really seriously examine the role of Christian triumphalism that plays in how mainline churches, predominantly white churches, but sometimes it spreads through Black churches too, don't have the humility to look at these issues. I remember Katie Cannon sharing an experience she had in a Southern conference, and they were talking about the need for America to look at the way that it has treated people who aren't white. And around her, she could hear the adults talking to the young people there saying, don't you ever apologize for anything. And, and this was a Christian conference. So, I've always remembered Katie saying that, and that it's like, right, somehow mainline denomination churches think they are right. They have the answer. Their way is the only way. And they use it to justify the way they treat Jews, the way they treat Catholics, and the way they treat non-white Christians. So what you've been, I've been studying, how Hitler used the eugenics movement in the US to model what they did to the Jews in Germany. And so I really appreciate these two new books. They're two books I'm going to add to my library. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Christian triumphalism is a huge problem. And that's why I think to really work to counter both racism and anti-Semitism, we have to work interreligiously. I think that kind of involvement helps us to hear our own strident claims and recognize them for what they are. And I just add one other thing is, I didn't get a lot of hellfire and damnation preaching in my childhood or now, but I'm aware that we don't hear, at least in my own tradition, I don't hear a lot of what I would call insightful, creative preaching about sin and evil. I get it that preachers are nervous to take on some of these topics, but certainly any study of racism and anti-Semitism, sin and evil are right present before our eyes, and I think study of the Holocaust, and there's been so much work done by Holocaust educators. You see how good people were taken in by evil and became bystanders. And so it's one thing about perpetrators. It seems to me, for many of us, when we read about bystanders, it's kind of a painful look in the mirror. And how we who are white are bystanders in race relations.
Dr. Boyce, as we're waiting for, we have two raised hands. I want to make sure they go before. Please go right ahead.
My name's Susan File, and I was a student of Professor Boyce at Union from 2013 to 2017 through 2016, actually. And I learned about unintended anti-Judaism in Christian preaching. And it's a weekly challenge to work creatively with the New Testament. Even yesterday's text, which I had to be very careful with, Acts 3:12-19, and the verse of the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, the God of our ancestors, this is Peter, has glorified his servant Jesus, whom you handed over and rejected in the presence of Pilate. He's speaking to the Jewish people there, though he had decided to release him. And I thought, here we go again. And this is just a totally typical example of what we have to work so carefully with. And I made a 1-sentence comment about this, and then I fell into the arms of Psalm 4 and preached about Psalm 4 because it was the only thing that made sense to me. And it solved every problem that I needed because it's about spiritual safety, Psalm 4. But I thought Acts was just walking through a field of landmines. And I'm sure others of us who have had this experience deal exactly as I do. Every week, we have to look at the scriptures and see how they're constructed because they're potentially very problematic for me.
Well, of course, I agree totally. And in the Catholic lectionary, we've had now 3 weeks in a row of Peter's speeches.
Oh.
So yesterday's actually was not quite, it doesn't really name the Jews as such. Yes, we have a lot of problems, a big challenge, and this is why New Testament studies are so important.
Yeah.
I would also really urge all of you to purchase a copy of the Jewish Annotated New Testament.
Yeah.
This is edited by two Jewish, Bible scholars, Susan raising up her copy. And so she's not going to make any profit from it. I didn't hire her to advertise this, but it also has some marvelous essays. And the second edition has more essays than the first edition. So it's if you're going to buy it, it's kind of expensive, but well. I had just resolved in my life, I'm going to start buying fewer books because I look around and I think, oh my God, what am I going to do with all these books? And then the pandemic hits and the libraries are all closed. So my book budget's gone. Anyway, what can you do? I'm supporting authors, right?
Yeah. Yep. We have another question on the floor, Dr. Boyes, or a conversation. Stephen? Stephen McCutcheon, your hand is raised.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, I've been trying to work with this actually for 50 years. I can tell you the story of that sometime, but it started at Union, in fact. But one of the things I think is happening for the churches is they got caught in a sort of corporate mentality after World War II and how to build, and they lost their sense of theology to build what the community is about. And when you go back and read the Torah, you see how the community of faith deals with those very failures that you're talking about. You know, that they never started out saying, whether it be the Jews or the early disciples, that these were good people that knew how to do things. No, what they did is they started out saying, no, let's look at exactly what our problems are. Let's admit them, confess them, and allow that to free us to do something new. And it seems to me there are ways to create, and particularly during this pandemic, a world church-wide conversation through the internet with surveys and questions that would help people re-examine who they are as a church, and then how the principles which they claim to believe in apply to racism. That may be off, but a lot of Christians would say that they're not racist. And they don't even think racism is a good thing. I mean, they aren't defending it or anything. But when they begin to look at what it is the big groundwork of their faith, then then they begin to think about that and how it, as a whole congregation, applies to dealing with racism. They can build a community that didn't have somebody telling them how they should behave, but discovering within the community how they deal with the fact, own their history, bad as it is, but see in that the groundswell of possibility of how they can be a healing force in society. And I think that there really is a step-by-step way. I've tried to do it myself and put it together, but I'm not trying to sell that as much as say churches need to learn how to talk with each other and need to learn how, we have a natural advantage that most groups who want to deal with racism don't have. We're a built-in community, a worldwide community, a diverse community. And now with the internet, we could actually talk with each other. And we could begin to examine what our faith says about what God meant when he was reconciling the whole world to himself, not just us. And even the Peter stuff that you were talking about, if you look at what Peter did, he faced that, and it released him to a new possibility, and we can do that as a church. So that's my 2 bits.
So Zoom does have many possibilities for us. I mean, I have to admit, I'm so zoomed out and I'm trying. The last 2 weekends, there's been a conference of 4 hours of Zoom lectures. And yesterday I left it when the speaker said, I'm just going to share my screen by paper and I'll read it to you and you can watch right along. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't spend my Sunday doing this. I'll read your paper later. Anyway, so yes, people could bring in churches which are predominantly white, could bring in Black and Asian or, preachers or, commentators or bring in Jews to preach or to do, but how you, I mean, I've given a lot of thought to this this year because my pandemic virtual parish has actually done some incredibly creative things, particularly with it's got a large sanctuary. They had huge photos of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor, signs with the names of other Blacks who have been killed in recent years, say their names. During Lent, they put 2 chairs up on the so-called main altar, one Black, one white, and then with the scales of justice in between. And then how the prayers of the faithful. And we also have been saying each week this so-called pledge for racial justice. I think it comes out of a Unitarian congregation in Texas. I looked that up long ago and I've sort of forgotten the details. But even as we're taking, first of all, it sort of assumes that everybody in the church is white, and that's really not who the congregants are. And secondly, when we're praying, taking a pledge for anti-racism work, which is important, we don't ever say anything about anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So I guess one of my pleas to the church is, even as we're countering racism, we have to be countering anti-Semitism. These 2 very closely linked. I see there's another question, so let me not talk so long.
John, would you like to ask your question? You can unmute yourself.
I think, good, I'm here. In San Francisco, West Coast time. Yet I was very shocked, I think is the word, to see someone retweeted some tweets by Richard Spencer, who originated that chant and that rally. And he seems to have faded a bit, but it was right after Easter. And he brought up the old, the German, I think it was called the German church or German Christian church, that, Christianity was, sort of a Jewish plot. And, all the, I was just amazed, and I'm wondering, if that's the other shoe, so to speak, that's going to drop after replacement theory, that there will then be attacks on the Jewish basis of Christianity. Now, the person who retweeted did say, well, at least he admits the Johannine truth, salvation is from the Jews, that verse in John 4. So, but I don't think that was Richard Spencer's intention. So I'm wondering, how can we prepare ourselves for that? Because I think that's coming.
Well, foretelling is not one of my gifts, but I think to name it, to name this retweet that you retweet, that's a hard term to say, to name it in a sermon, or, to, write some little column about it. I mean, I think, it's all confused now because cancel culture. I mean, the way in which our whole national discourse has been coarsened. If you don't want to be disillusioned, don't read the comments on somebody's essay, because there's a mean level of meanness that seems to have overtaken us, and then that just feeds into racism and anti-Semitism. So Rita, you're controlling the time. I'm not going anywhere, but I'm assuming that you.
Yes. So it's 2:46. Is it okay that we engage you for another 5 minutes or so?
I'm totally at your disposal. So
friends, if someone has to sign off now, we certainly understand, and we just say thank you so much for being here. In the chat, you'll see a survey. We'll ask that everyone, so if you click on that survey now, what will happen is you'll save it out in Google, and we're asking you. I'm sorry, I'm in an apartment and someone's knocking on my door, so I apologize. One moment, please. Otherwise, we have a board member that's here. I'm hoping she didn't have to leave. Oh yeah, Mim is still here. And I wanted to see if Min, because the screen just moved around, if Min had anything you wanted to share at this point. And Mim is one of our esteemed members of our trustee board.
Well, this is enlightening. Oh, I'm muted.
Oh, you're good.
It's enlightening and disheartening at the same time.
Yeah.
To think that all of those union alums out there who've been through Mary Boyce's class, who've learned some of the roots of this disquieting phenomenon that we have in this country, and which seems to be worldwide, you would think that we could come to a better place, but we don't seem to. And that hurts. That all those union students who are out there struggling what to say in their sermons don't seem to have brought it to public attention. How can we do that? How can we make this this struggle, this phenomenon of demonizing the other, less powerful in our country? It seems to have a life of its own, and I'm amazingly disturbed by it.
I guess for me, Mim, and thank you for your comment, is that we need to find ways as churches to put this in every service as a prayer of some kind. I mean, the larger problem of the demonization of the other. I mean, like, okay, I'm going to demonize Marjorie Taylor Greene, but this notion, that the Democrats are all, with QAnon, are all pedophiles. I mean, why? I'm waiting. I have the U.S. bishops are always going out talking. I can criticize my bishops. They're preaching about abortion as this great evil. Why aren't they condemning QAnon? Well, I mean, I think bishops should do things other than condemn, but I mean, let's name these issues. And I realize that, some people are, that may be taken in, and they're not it's gonna take away from donations. But I guess I'm looking for some church leaders with real gumption to speak very specifically to these patterns of othering the other. I mean, that's the great challenge, really, of all peoples. And the struggle that we have in the United States is also a global struggle.
Yeah.
But, just the way that George Soros has become a symbol, for every, and the term global has become a meme for anti-Semitism. I think we have to educate people about these things. Anyway, I don't work in the pulpit on Sundays. I'm in the pew, but I sure have a lot of feelings about what I think the clergy should be talking about. And I'm sure that union alums are doing fabulous things, but we're not as many as we'd like to be. And So I think maybe one of the most important things we could do is partner with one another and help each other with what we've learned.
Susan, do you want to have?
I'll just say this very briefly. Bonhoeffer's date of execution was April 9th. And I always lift that up the week either before or after it. And that's my way of dealing with the dilemma of ignorance in Germany and Bonhoeffer's extraordinary courage and his ministry. I just get goosebumps when I think about what he went through. And so I use that as an example in the martyrdom of Bonhoeffer to speak about anti-racism and all of the things related to anti-Semitism.
So one of my heroes besides Bonhoeffer is Bernhard Lichtenberg, who was the rector of the Catholic Cathedral in Berlin.
Oh.
And after Kristallnacht in November of 1938, he resolved that at every day he would pray out loud in the cathedral for Jews.
Oh, wonderful.
Now, that ultimately cost him his life. He was taken prisoner and died on the way to Dachau, I believe. But, just this, and, I'm sure that was not a popular move in any way. He just did that. I mean, so prayer as resistance, I think we could do a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Boyes, thank you so much. And thank you for having the wisdom to say, no, Rita, this will not be a Q&A. This will be a conversation. I hope only one of the many conversations that we have, because it is so, so very needed. And thank you for illuminating us all. I think I'll give Ashley the last word when I think we all agree with her when she says in the chat, thank you for this illuminating presentation and conversation, replete with resources. And I agree with that. So thank you all. If Dr. Boyes, if we were live right now, you would hear thunderous applause. Sorry, you only have me to say thank you and to clap aloud.
And my pleasure.
All right. Thank you all. We'll see you around campus soon. Bye, everyone.